Welcome to Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities presentation, introducing new summer youth reporting, where we'll discuss the new summer youth report and how to complete it. This is Jay Burns from the Provider and Contract Management Unit. We'll be joined today by Jim Gears, Ginger Scaife, and Melanie Seckler. When we think about summer youth, these services are really important to youth with disabilities to help them gain confidence, work experience, and work skills. The report serves as a billing form, so it's important for many reasons. It captures the individual student's experience, as well as recommendations for the student. Counselors and coordinators use the form to understand how the student did during the summer, what work tasks they performed, their general attitude, progress, and soft skills. Final recommendations made by the provider are used to plan next steps in future services. The report can be used at staffings with the family, guardian, and other community supports, such as teachers, IEP meetings, DD boards, and other partners. This is a billing invoice, so we do want to pay our providers accurately and appropriately for the services they provided. This summer's report has been streamlined to give everyone maximum effectiveness and usability. There's a lot of benefits to this year's report. You'll hear pointed out improvements such as a 2-in-1 report, which serves both as a report and bill for the service of summer youth work experience, as well as the training stipend. You'll also hear the phrase, green means go. We've highlighted all of the required fields in the report with a green color. You can instantly look at the report and see that all of the green fields need to be completed. At a glance, you can tell if there's any missing information before it's submitted. This will help reduce the number of rejections and denials. There's also an easy-to-use review checklist at the bottom of the form. There's auto-expanding fields for any information typed directly into the form. Let's look more closely at the form with our rehabilitation program specialist, Ginger Scaife, Jim Gears, and Melanie Seckler.
Hi, this is Ginger. First, let's look at where to find the form and then how to use it. First, we're going to start on OOD's website, which is ood.ohio.gov. And you're going to click Information for Providers here in the middle top portion of the page. When you get to this page, go ahead and scroll down and click on Provider Forms. When you get to the Provider Forms page, we're going to go ahead and expand out the number of entries. So I'm going to choose 100. And then we're going to scroll on down to form number 21, that is Summer Youth. When I click on the Summer Youth form, it brings up the Excel form. And we're going to go ahead and open this service. And we're going to start here with the instructions. If I scroll to the very top of this portion, Jim, can you start to walk us through the instructions there at the top of the form?
Sure. We've designed the form to be as simple as possible for providers to use. As Jay kind of mentioned, any form field that needs to be filled in is shaded green. If there's text that is in red, that means that that field is not editable by the provider. That's a calculation that the form itself is creating for them. So anytime that you use red text, you'll be able to edit that. And if you try to, you'll get an error message that that's a protected field. But all of the green fields that are in the form itself are something that you can click directly into the box and go ahead and type into that information that you need to.
Great.
One of the things that Jay also kind of talked about is that we've created a form that is 2-in-1. So this is used for both the service itself and the vocational training stipend. So that keeps it simple. In the report body, we're going to take a look at it in a few minutes. We'll talk about the different fields where you would enter how to calculate the actual service rate and also the actual VTS rate for the individual student. Some of the things we wanted to highlight on this instructions tab are some of the common issues that might come up if the form is not filled out completely. So there are protections within the form itself that allow the calculations to take place. if something is empty or it's not filled in correctly, then the form will not calculate. And there's several places within the form that you can look to see that. And these are some of the possible reasons why that might happen, and then also solutions on what you can do to fix that so that the form will calculate itself. So there's an issue with the service rate not populating, and then there's also an issue with the DTS not populating for the individual student. The other thing that we wanted to share on this instruction tab is some tips for you when you're filling out the form itself. If you are in a box, in the box where the narrative would go into is column G. If you're in that column and you want to create a new line, you can hit the Alt Enter key and it will skip down and create a new line. So if that is helpful for you to kind of share your information with our staff, then you can go ahead and do that just to organize the information that you're putting in there. The other nice thing is that we have gotten column G to be able to auto expand if you type directly into it, or you have the ability to go ahead and type in another program such as Word and paste it into the actual Excel document. If you are pasting from Word to Excel, you're going to go ahead and click into the cell itself, go ahead and select the paste option at the top, and you're going to want to choose the option that looks like a little clipboard with some lines, blue lines across it. That is allowing it to match the destination that you're pasting into. So if you match the destination, it will go ahead and expand that cell. If you just try to paste it in with the traditional paste or one of the shortcut functions, the Control V, it's not going to auto expand the form itself, but you still have the ability to go ahead and manually expand those cells if you need to. Or looking at for the instructions is that we also want to make sure that you're not just cut and pasting the documentation from other days or from other people's reports. These reports are designed to be individualized for the student. We'll talk a little bit about what that might mean to be individualized. All right, if we want to go ahead and look at the actual report form.
All right, so that's the next tab over down here. We just covered instructions, so I'm going to click on report form. And Jim, completing these forms from top to bottom, that's pretty important, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, we've designed the form to make sure that you fill out all the boxes that need to be filled out. The green shaded areas are required fields. If you don't fill those out, it doesn't give the form the information it needs to do the calculations properly or for our account examiners to process your billing. So if you don't fill something out, it will not either calculate or we're going to have to return the form to you for correction.
Can you walk us through each of these fields from top to bottom?
Sure. The first block is the same as we have on our traditional service reports. That's information about your organization. So it's the provider's name, address, and the fiscal contact information. Now, it's very important that that information matches what shows up on the authorization for services. So if you are known as XYZ Company, then XYZ Company should be put in that first box, which is G1. So that's going to be XYZ Company, your billing address as we have it in our accounting system, as shown on the authorization itself, and then the fiscal contact that's listed in your provider management profile. The next thing we're looking at is the actual authorization number that we've sent you. So this allows us to match this invoice with a specific authorization in case. So if this is missing or incorrect, we're not going to be able to find the participant, or it may make it more challenging to find the participant that this report belongs to. The next one is something that's unique to each provider. It's the provider invoice number, and that is a number that you create as an organization so that you can track your internal billing processes. So this is information that we put in when we pay you. It goes on our accounting screen, and then when you get your remittance form or a payment, you can go back and compare that to see which invoices that you've received. Now, this number can be alphanumeric, so you could have something like summer youth. You could have participants' initials in the authorization number. It's something that you come up, something that's meaningful for you internally as an organization. The next thing we're looking at is the provider staff name. So that's the person or persons who are providing the services. So you're going to want to put the person's name and then their initials behind that in parentheses. In the report body, we have a place for each staff person to put their initials if they provided service that day. And that allows us to go back and say who was providing services and looking at how the invoices were filled out. The other thing is some providers have other individuals who actually complete the reports on behalf of their staff. If that's the case, we would like to know who actually filled out the report. So if there's questions, then we can go back and ask that person. The invoice date is the date that you actually send it to OOD to be processed and paid. That should not be dated for a date in the future. So don't go ahead and put down that today is March 30th. Don't put an invoice date of April 2nd on that, because we're going to receive that. If you send that today, we receive that before you the invoice date, and it's going to be something that our accounting system is not going to accept. The other thing is, when we're looking at this, is this a final or a partial billing? Providers have the ability to go ahead and send the invoice and report to us up to 2 times during the summer. So a provider could break it up between the second and third week, or they could wait till all 5 weeks of the service are completed to go ahead and bill us. Whether you pick final or partial, the form is going to check to make sure that certain fields are filled out before it will allow it to actually calculate. A final report is going to have the attestations checked at the bottom, and it's also going to have the 2 summaries, both the provider and the individual summary on that, to process the final invoice. If it is a partial invoice, then it's only going to check for the 3 attestations. It will wait until you're done with the last 2 weeks or last 3 weeks before it looks to see if you filled out those summary blocks for us. Those summary blocks are very important, and we're going to talk a little bit about what goes in that and how we use that information a little bit later. If you notice that the service start date is not shaded green, so that means that that is a field that you will not be able to edit. We get that date from the first date entered in the tables for the week. So when we go down a little bit and fill that out or look at that first block, so A21, when you put a date there, it will pull that date into the report invoice for you. You cannot change that date. The service end date is something that you are going to be required to put in there. So that would be the last date of service that the person received. The next blocks pull from the actual report template themselves. So the summer youth work experience rate, the vocational training stipend rate, and also the bilingual supplement rate would be something that pulls from the report. If this person has been approved for a bilingual supplement, that box in F13 will drop down to say yes. That will add an extra 10% to the actual base service rate. So the summer youth work experience rate, it'll add 10% in that line and calculate that in the invoice total. That, there again, that bilingual supplement is only for cases where the counselors have indicated that that person needs some sort of alternative communication, whether it's a foreign language or sign language, to ensure effective communication during the service. The next block that we look at, and these next blocks are all going to be the same, so we're going to look at the week 1 block, the business and address. You have the ability to put in there where the summer youth work experience is taking place. We do allow providers to change the location and address of the summer youth work experience once during the 5-week period. So if you're working 3 weeks at one business, weeks 1, 2, and 3 will have that information in there. And then if you change to another work site, weeks in 4 and 5 will have a different address and business name in there. So that gives you the ability to adjust your report as necessary depending on how you're providing the service. The next block we look at is A or B17 when it talks about the actual work times of the service. So this is the time of the service. So you would type in there from 9 to 1 o'clock in this block. If you move over, the next block asks the number of people in the group itself. This is how we calculate the rate. So this is restricted to a response of 1, 2, 3, or 4 because the max group size for a summer youth work experience is 4 people. Depending on the number of people you put in there, it will pull the different rates for that. So if it's individual rate, it's going to be the $1,012 for the individual. If we're looking at a 2-person rate, it's going to pull the rate of $658.48 for 2 people. The next block that you're going to be able to edit is B18, and it's the total hours of work for that week. So if you're providing the full 20 hours, you're going to put 20 there. If you're going to provide the minimum of 12 hours, then you're going to go ahead and put 12 there. This is how the form is going to calculate if the service needs to be prorated. OOD is allowing this year as an accommodation because some providers have explained that businesses aren't able to host students as much as they have in the past. If they are only able to have a student there for 12 or 15 hours, that's what you would put in there. Then there's a calculation that takes the number of hours that they work divided by 20, comes up with a percentage, and then goes ahead and applies that to the base weekly rate for that service. Once all the form is filled out, it will actually go ahead and put a rate in there for the weekly rate. There again, that's shaded red because that's something that a provider cannot edit. It's always going to be there, that it's going to be based on a calculation. If that still shows up as a 0 after you fill out the form, that means that you missed something in that individual weekly table that is not allowing a calculation to take place. So common issues would be you don't have the number of people during the week, you don't have the number of hours during the week, or one of the fields, when you start looking at rows 21 through 25, there's something in there that is not completed. The next thing that we look at as the next editable field is G19, and that's looking at the job tasks. This is something that can be the same for all the students at the work group because they should be doing the same or very similar job tasks. You go ahead, outline those. This would be some place where you could actually start to separate that by writing down a job task, creating a new line, another job task, creating a new line, another job task, etc. Remember, if you use Alt-Enter, it will go down and create a new line for you to start typing at. This field will expand as you type into it, and it can accommodate a pretty good amount of text in there before you run out of space. Now we go back down to the actual tables themselves. So starting in row 21, that's where the date goes in, that's where the start time for the individual will go in, and the end time for the individual. So columns B and C is where we get the vocational training stipend wages. So if your group was to run from 9 to 1 o'clock, but you had an individual show up at 9:30, in block B21, you would put 9:30 as that individual's start time, and then you would go ahead and put 1 o'clock as their end time. It will go ahead and calculate the appropriate number of units of service for that. The next column we have is column D, and that's for less time billable. Depending on how you structured your summer youth program, you might have to give a student a break for an unpaid meal period, or due to a student's disability, they may require some more frequent breaks than just a regular 15-minute break. OOD provides a 15-minute break for every 4 hours that a student works. That is a paid break and does not need to be documented here, but if you give them a meal period then you would take off the 30 minutes. Or if the person needed 2 additional 15-minute breaks, that's where you would go ahead and say, okay, we're deducting an additional 30 minutes for those 2 additional breaks that the person had. Once you enter in that line, that row up to the point of ABC, then it will go ahead and calculate the number of units for that time, and that's going to be in column E. If it doesn't calculate in column E, some of the common issues or errors is that something's not filled out, or if you have the start time happening after the end time. So an example would be, somebody puts in 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. instead of 12 p.m. It's going to say, well, that can't happen because you can't end before you start. So it will stay as a 0. So that would be a clue or an indicator. Look to the left of that line to see what might not be filled in. The next thing is column F is asking for the staff initials. So the person who's providing that service, we would like to see the same job coach working with students throughout the week, but we understand that sometimes people might have conflicts or somebody might call in sick. So we need to know who's providing that service. That ties back to the invoice when it says the staff name, the name of the staff who are providing the service. And then the last part is column G, where we start to look at the individual narrative of that student. When we talk about an individual narrative about that person's experience, performance, and interventions, that means what did you do to provide some guidance to that specific person. So we have the basic job tasks that everybody is working at, but then we have to look at, how does that person actually do? Now, Ginger, why don't we move over to the report example, and we can kind of look at one that's been filled out for you. All right.
Sure.
So if we go back to week 1.
All the way up here to the top. And are these where you're talking about right here, Jim?
Right. So we put in an example here what it might look like as an individual evaluation of that person. And when we did this, we want to make sure that you're doing this as you go along, because if you do it at the same time, then it's very easy to do. When I was filling out this report example, it only took me about 5 minutes to write an example of how that student might be doing. So while it's fresh in your mind, if you take some notes during the day, at the end of the day, if you go ahead and just type this, it will go by very quickly. But we had some individual information about this. If we look at, on day 2, when we're looking at row 22, we noticed that Noah was 12 minutes late to the work site. So he had a transportation issue. So we wrote down there and explained why he was late that day so that the counselor can understand that. Now, we talk about, if he has any problems or challenges during the workday, what were those challenges? How did it impact the work? And what did the job coach do to help that person get over that? It could be as simple as, the person was having some difficulties with a job task, and the job coach modeled the job task for that, or the job coach went ahead and created a checklist for that person to go through. But we would like to know what the job coach is doing to help that person learn how to do that service or provide the job task that the employer is asking them to do. So that's kind of looking at what we would expect in a weekly summary for that. So that would just carry on for as many weeks that you're reporting on this. Now, if we kind of scroll down to the bottom of this, we talked about the checklist and the summary at the bottom. The summaries themselves is an individual assessment of how the person feels that they did and how you as a provider feel that they did. And then if you look at rows 76 through 78 are just some check boxes to make sure that you've looked over the form to make sure that it looks correct for you. The individual's self-assessment and the provider's assessment are very important because that gives the counselor information of how the person feels they did, because that's important for future planning, but it also gives us your recommendations of what you expect this person to need for future services so we can begin to plan with them. We share these reports, as Jay mentioned, share these reports with the schools when the kids go back to school. So this is information that is helpful not only for the counselor, but it may also be helpful for the school, for the parents, or even the person themselves. They might have a perception of how they feel that they did. People tend to be a little bit harsher on themselves. But if they see that the job coach said, you did this really well, and you did this really well, that will help that person kind of mature into a potential future worker.
So what you're saying here, Jim, is copying and pasting either on the daily or in the summaries is not a good idea.
Absolutely. Nobody has the same day every day. So we want to make sure that we're really reflecting on what that individual is doing, because that's helpful. Because if you just tell us that they did the same thing over and over and over again, then we're not getting the information that we can give feedback to that student so that they can grow. And we also can't figure out what the next step of that service should be.
Great. Thank you so much. And Melanie, can you explain to us how AE2s and counselors review the form?
Yes, Ginger. On the bottom of the form, there's a reminder to AE2s to make sure that the weekly rate is completed for each weekly block. If the rate isn't there, the provider may have missed a field and the form will not calculate correctly. There's also a reminder to check to make sure that there's an entry greater than 0 for the total units of service in the row, because if there's not, then that means there's an incomplete entry. And both of these reasons would require the AE2 to deny the service, and the provider will need to review, edit, and resend the invoice for payment. The counselor checks are similar. They're related to the content of the report. We want to ensure that there's a description of the job tasks for each day and that the student's performance and soft skills were documented. Counselors will want to ensure that providers detailed any interventions used with the student and that this report is consistent. If the report has a daily notation that the student did wonderful, showed a lot of growth, has a lot of great comments, but then that final summary is negative and says the student's not ready for community employment and other services are listed to help prepare the student, well, that's a conflict of information, and it's very confusing to the other stakeholders we share information with, such as the student's family and school personnel. And Jim touched on that earlier. You'll notice in this section, there's a statement that says, by releasing the payment for authorization, the VR counselor and/or coordinator states that they have read the report and feels it meets the requirements of the VR fee schedule. So counselors and coordinators will want to make sure that the report meets their expectations.
It is helpful for providers to know what will be reviewed. Can you tell me if there's any common errors with this form or reasons for rejections and revisions?
Yes, some common errors we find from year to year are issues with the summary and daily reports not matching. As I said earlier, the summary needs to align with the daily recommendations and the report needs to be consistent. If transportation is being provided, the service report and transportation report should not have conflicting information. We also cannot accept generic daily notes or copy and paste reporting that has no individualized comments for the student. We recommend taking daily notes that later feed into the report. As you know, it's very difficult to remember details from day to day. So it's like if you've ever used one of those food tracking apps to help you with your diet. If you don't log what you've had to eat right after you've eaten it, you probably are either going to completely forget to log the meal, or if you come back to it the next day or a few days later, you're not going to remember exactly what you ate and the quantity, and then your whole tracking system is off. And if you're like me, you'll probably just enter what you had the day before because it should be pretty close, right? Well, that's not how things should be done in VR, and especially when documenting the good, the bad, and the ugly of summer youth services, providers should be taking notes daily and not waiting until the service is over and relying on their memory to make sure that report is complete.
Thank you, Melanie. Jim, do you have any final reminders about the summer youth reporting?
Just to make sure that if something is not filling out correctly, start to go back to that instruction tab, look to see what the common issues are and see if that tracks it down. The biggest one we think that providers are going to have is if you are going to be billing this as a final report, you must have those two summaries in place. If this is a partial billing during the middle of the summer, That's not going to be required. You'll still have to have the 3 attestations saying that we've looked over the report, we've reviewed the VTS with the individual, and they agree with that. Those are going to be required for any billing, but the final report is going to look for that summary to be filled out before that it calculates for you. The last thing that we kind of wanted to talk about is that each year our monitoring and compliance unit goes through and looks at summer youth invoices and services. Summer youth services represent a significant undertaking for both VR and our providers. So we want to make sure that we're getting the best quality of services for our students. These monitoring and compliance reviews are mainly geared towards helping providers improve services and reporting from year to year, but occasionally we do have to look at other issues that might have come up as part of the service itself. So at the end of the year, if you do get a review by the monitoring and compliance unit, we do share that information with you. And as I say, it's more in the spirit of helping you get to be in a better position for summer youth in the next year. Not every provider will get a PCM or a MCU review. We have 100 and some providers, and that's a significant undertaking. We look at a random sample of providers throughout the year to go ahead and do that. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I think that covers the form and what we're looking for from providers.
Thank you so much. We're going to go back to our original slideshow here. So for summer youth billing and reporting support, number 1, consult the VR provider manual and interim guidance. That's archived on the Provider News webpage. If the questions remain, then providers should initially consult with a local AE2 for any local billing questions. Providers should contact the counselor or coordinator for authorization amendment requests or urgent service needs. Local vocational supervisor liaisons are available for additional assistance. Finally, email pcmu@ood.ohio.gov for additional assistance if resolution cannot be obtained through the other above methods. On behalf of the Provider and Contract Management Unit, we thank you for watching this video. Please reach out to us if you have any questions.